This isn't a fairy tale about a princess. It's a real-life story about a queen who everyone thought was a pawn. Roman Foster was a king in the concrete jungle of New York City, a man who saw his wife Hallie as nothing more than a beautiful decoration. At the most important night of his career, the annual Metropolitan Legacy Gala, he stood in front of his rivals, his partners, and the press, and he publicly mocked her. He called her small. He called her a hobbyist. What he didn't know was that while he was laughing, Hallie was preparing to take the throne. Because in the world of old money and new power, the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous. The penthouse at 740 Park Avenue wasn't a home. It was a statement. It was a fortress of beige Italian marble glass walls that stared judgmentally at Central Park and art that was purchased for its investment value, not its beauty. This was Roman Foster's world, and Hallie Foster just lived in it. Roman was a man carved from granite and ambition. He was the CEO of Foster Holdings, a real estate empire that had devoured half of Manhattan's skyline. He hadn't just inherited it, he had weaponized it. He was tall with a mane of distinguished silver hair and wore bespoke Brioni suits that seemed to repel dust and weakness equally. His voice was a low rumble that expected and always received absolute obedience. And then there was Hallie. To Roman, Hallie was his greatest acquisition. She was a Beaumont. The Beaumonts were old money, the kind that whispered in the halls of the Frick and owned dusty libraries upstate. They had the one thing Roman couldn't build: legacy. He had married her a decade ago, merging his brute force wealth with her quiet pedigree. In his eyes, the deal was simple. He gave her a life of limitless luxury, and she in turn was expected to be beautiful, silent, and supportive. Hallie was pale and slender, with large, observant grey eyes that most people mistook for timidity. She ran the household with the silent efficiency of a Swiss watch. She organized his dinners, vetted his invitations, and wore the precise, elegant clothing he preferred today, a simple cashmere day dress in a shade of cream. "The gala is tonight, Roman," she said softly, her voice barely registering over the hum of the city. She was standing in his vast mahogany-paneled dressing room, holding out 3 silk ties. "The car is arranged for 7. Arthur Kensington's office confirmed he will be speaking at 9. Roman didn't look up from the Patek Philippe he was fastening to his wrist. "The blue one. Not that one, the one with the finer weave," he grunted, taking it from her. "Kensington's speech is the only thing that matters. He's finally stepping down from the Metropolitan Legacy Fund. Tonight, they announce the new chair." The Metropolitan Legacy Fund, or MLF, was the unspoken god of New York philanthropy. It was a centuries-old institution that held the keys to the city's cultural and social future. Its approval could greenlight a new museum wing, a billion-dollar urban renewal project, or kill it dead. The chair of the MLF was in many circles more powerful than the mayor. "You're still certain it will be you?" Hallie asked, her hands clasped. Roman finally looked at her, a smirk playing on his thin lips. "Ellie, it's a done deal. My Foster Resurgence project for the West Side is exactly the kind of bold move the MLF needs. Kensington knows I have the vision to lead the fund. The only other vaguely serious contender is that tech bro Julian Thorne. And the MLF board would never hand the keys to a new money disruptor from California who wears hoodies to board meetings." He straightened his tie, admiring his own reflection. "This is the final piece. Once I'm chair, the Resurgence project is unstoppable. Our name will be on every building from 34th to 42nd. Hallie nodded, her expression unreadable. Of course, dear. It will be your night. Our night, Ellie. Our night, he corrected, though his tone made it clear he meant his. Now make sure you wear the diamonds, the ones I bought you from Cartier after the Hamptons deal. They reflect well under the lights. He swept out of the room, leaving her in his wake. Hallie stood silently for a moment, the scent of his expensive cologne hanging in the air. She looked at the two rejected ties, then walked back to her own wing of the penthouse. Her room was different. It was smaller, filled with books, and had a small antique Beaumont desk. She sat down, her posture unchanged, and opened a laptop. It wasn't the sleek, modern tablet Roman had bought her. This one was older, encrypted, and password-protected, with a 24-character alphanumeric key. She logged in. The screen wasn't filled with party plans or fashion sites. It was a complex dashboard of financial portfolios, legal documents, and encrypted message chains. For the last 10 years, Hallie had been the sole trustee of what was left of her family's legacy, the Beaumont Trust. When her father died, the trust was almost insolvent, bled dry by bad investments. Roman had glanced at its books, once dismissed it as pocket money, and told her to let his accountants handle the charity write-offs. He never looked again. He never knew that Hallie, the quiet wife he mistook for a doll, had inherited her grandfather's mind, a mind for numbers and strategy. While Roman was building towers of glass, Hallie was quietly, meticulously rebuilding a foundation of stone. She'd spent a decade in the hobby Roman so despised. She'd sat on small, unglamorous committees for libraries in the Bronx and art programs in Queens. But she wasn't just planning flower arrangements. She was learning. She was networking. She was identifying cracks in the city's philanthropic armor. She made small, brilliant, anonymous investments. She learned the real language of power, not the loud roars of men like Roman, but the silent, binding signature on a contract. The Beaumont Trust, once a relic, was now a silent powerhouse. Its assets had grown 2,000%, and no one, least of all her husband, had any idea. She opened a secure email from the MLF's legal counsel. It was a simple confirmation. Subject agenda, point 4.b, all terms accepted. The transition is locked. Hallie closed the laptop. She walked to her wardrobe and looked past the beige, cream, and grey dresses Roman preferred. Far in the back, concealed in a simple black garment bag, was another dress. A custom-made Oscar de la Renta in a shade of deep, possessive emerald green. She checked her watch. 6 p.m. Time to put on the diamonds and play the part of Mrs. Foster. One last time. The Great Hall of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was transformed. It wasn't just a party. It was a demonstration of hierarchy. Towering floral arrangements reached toward the vaulted ceilings. Champagne flowed from fountains carved of ice, and the air vibrated with the sound of 1,000 clipped, powerful conversations. This was the Metropolitan Legacy Fund Gala, the apex predator of New York charity events. Roman Foster moved through the crowd like a shark. Hallie was on his arm, a perfect silent accessory in a shimmering pale gold gown and the requisite Cartier diamonds. Her smile was polite, her gaze distant. Roman was in his element. "Senator," he boomed, gripping a politician's shoulder. "Good to see you. My Resurgence project will be creating 10,000 jobs in your district. 10,000. "Roman, always a pleasure," the senator replied, his eyes already scanning the room for someone more important. "Roman," a sharp voice cut through the murmur. Amelia Vance, The city's most feared society and finance columnist for the Times approached them, her pen poised like a scalpel. "Big night for you. The whispers are deafening. Everyone says you're the heir apparent." Roman gave her his most charming, predatory smile. "Amelia, you know I'm just here to support the fund. We all want what's best for this city." "Of course," she said, her own smile just as sharp. "But your resurgence project is controversial. Many in the preservation community say it's a vanity project that will destroy the West Side's character." Roman's smile tightened. "That's the talk of small minds, Amelia. You can't make an omelette without breaking a few eggs. Progress requires bold strokes. The MLF knows that." "We'll see," she said, before her eyes landed on Hallie. "And Mrs. Foster, a pleasure as always. You're looking radiant. What's your role in this grand resurgence?" Before Hallie could open her mouth, Roman laughed a loud, dismissive sound. "Hallie keeps the home fires burning, don't you, darling? She makes sure my suits are pressed and the champagne is cold. That's a full-time job, believe me." Amelia's eyebrow raised a fraction of an inch. Hallie's polite smile didn't waver, though her grip on her small clutch tightened. "I mean, she has her own little projects, of course," Roman continued, gesturing vaguely. "The Beaumont Trust. Very noble. I understand the Beaumont Trust has become quite active recently." Amelia pressed, sensing a crack. "Active? Oh, I suppose," Roman said, waving a dismissive hand. "She sits on committees. They debate flower arrangements for library fundraisers. It's wonderful, keeps her busy." He was enjoying this performing for the small crowd that had gathered. He was positioning himself as the serious man of action, and his wife as the charming, frivolous socialite. This was the image. Across the room, a different kind of power entered. Julian Thorne. He was 35, a decade younger than Roman, and had made a dozen fortunes in Silicon Valley. He was now back in his native New York, pouring billions into disruptive tech, and to Roman's disgust, philanthropy. He was wearing a dark, impeccably tailored Tom Ford suit, but no tie. "Roman," Thorne said, his voice smooth and clear. He nodded politely. "Hallie, you look wonderful." There was an immediate subtle shift in his tone. When he spoke to Roman, it was a challenge. When he spoke to Hallie, it was with a genuine, almost curious respect. "Thorne," Roman replied, his voice dripping with condescension. "Surprised to see you here. I thought your crowd was more digital. Burning Man, isn't it? The MLF is the heart of New York, Roman. I'm a New Yorker," Thorne said simply. "I'm just hoping the fund's new leadership has a vision for the next century, not the last one." This was a direct hit at Roman's project, which was all brick-and-mortar arrogance. "Vision," Roman scoffed. "Vision isn't about apps and algorithms, son. It's about steel. It's about concrete. It's about taking a risk and building something permanent." "Permanent can be a synonym for obsolete, Roman," Thorne countered, sipping his champagne. "The future isn't about building on the city. It's about building in it, connecting communities, sustainable green digital infrastructure." "That's cute," Roman said, his face flushing. "You stick to your video games. We'll handle the real world." Julian Thorne's gaze shifted from Roman to Hallie, who had been watching the exchange with the quiet intensity of a chess master. "And you, Hallie?" Thorne asked, ignoring her husband. "What do you think the future of the city is, steel or connection?" Roman tensed, ready to cut her off. But Hallie spoke first. Her voice was quiet, but it sliced through the tension. "I think the future, Mr. Thorne," she said, Meeting his eyes is realizing that the strongest structures aren't made of steel or code. They're built from legacy. The question is simply what kind of legacy one chooses to build. Thorne stared at her for a long beat, his expression one of sudden, profound understanding. A slow smile spread across his face. "Well said, Mrs. Foster. Very well said." Roman, however, was furious. He hated being upstaged. He hated that Thorne had addressed her at all. And he hated the confidence in her tone. He grabbed her elbow, his fingers digging into her arm. "If you'll excuse us," Roman snarled, dragging her away. "My wife and I need to greet the guest of honor." He pulled her toward the dais, where Arthur Kensington, the elderly, snow-haired, outgoing chair, was holding court. Roman was fuming. He saw her exchange with Thorne as a betrayal and embarrassment. "What the hell was that?" he hissed into her ear, his smile still plastered on for the crowd. "I was answering a question," Hallie said, her voice perfectly level. "You don't answer questions, Ellie. You smile. You let me talk. Especially to that punk. You made me look weak, pandering to his nonsense." He asked for my opinion. "Your opinion?" He whispered, his voice vibrating with rage. "Your opinion is what I tell you it is. You're a Foster. You're my wife. Your only job tonight is to stand there, look beautiful, and not screw this up for me. Do you understand?" Hallie looked at him. Her face was pale, but her eyes were not timid. They were cold. They were the color of the ocean just before a storm. She said nothing. She simply extracted her arm from his grip, smoothed the fabric of her dress, and refastened the smile on her face. Roman took her silence as submission. He was, as usual, catastrophically wrong. The main dining room was a sea of black ties and glittering jewels. They were seated at the head table, table 1, right next to the podium. Roman was in his element, radiating confidence. He had Arthur Kensington to his right, and the mayor to his left. Hallie was seated between Roman and an elderly benefactor who was discussing her poodle. Roman was holding court. He'd had 3 glasses of champagne before dinner, and 2 glasses of a very expensive Bordeaux with his filet mignon. He was loud, charismatic, and utterly convinced of his own impending victory. The main course plates were cleared. The lights dimmed slightly. Arthur Kensington remained at the table, but the gala's host, a famous news anchor, took the stage to kill time before the main speeches. Amelia Vance, the columnist, materialized at their table, her notepad in hand. This was highly unorthodox during the main dinner, but Amelia Vance played by her own rules. "Roman, a moment," she said, her voice low but projecting. The chatter at the table quieted. "I'm running a piece on the fund's future for tomorrow's early edition. My editor is pushing me. The rumor is that your Resurgence project is the front runner for the fund's first 9-figure grant under the new chair. Any comment?" Roman beamed. This was it. The narrative was being cemented before his very eyes. "I can only say," he said loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear, "that Foster Holdings is deeply committed to the future of this city. We believe in building, not just talking." "But some," Amelia pressed, "say the project hinges entirely on you being named chair, that it's a conflict of interest, that the fund would be backing your own company." Roman's face darkened. "That's libel, Amelia. The project stands on its own merit. It's the only one on the table big enough to truly matter." "And what about the opposition?" she asked. "Julian Thorne's Green Connect proposal, for instance. It's smaller, more community-focused, and has a lot of grassroots support." Roman let out a short, sharp laugh. "Thorne, that's not a proposal, it's a pamphlet. It's a fantasy drawn on a napkin. You can't power a city with bike paths and free Wi-Fi, Amelia. You need grit. You need steel. Then Amelia turned her pen and her attention to Hallie. It was the move of a master journalist wrong-footing the powerful man by addressing his silent partner. "Mrs. Foster," Amelia said, her voice clear and precise. "You run the Beaumont Trust. It's one of the oldest names in this room. Your trust focuses on community, on the arts, on the very grassroots efforts Mr. Thorne seems to be championing. What is your position on the Resurgence Project? Does the Beaumont Trust support your husband's vision?" The table went utterly silent. The mayor paused his spoon halfway to his dessert. Arthur Kensington turned his head, his ancient, intelligent eyes fixed on Hallie. Roman saw it as an attack, a way to divide him. He saw Hallie in her pale gold dress as a liability. Before Hallie could form a single syllable, Roman threw his head back and laughed. It was a loud, braying, ugly sound. "Hallie," he boomed, sloshing his wine, "you're asking Hallie about a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure project." He turned to his wife, his eyes filled with a drunken, cruel amusement. He patted her hand as if she were a child. "Darling, I don't think Amelia understands. Your trust is... What is it you do again? You fund poetry readings, don't you? And you saved that little community garden in Brooklyn. Wonderful. Very sweet." Hallie's face was a mask of porcelain. She did not move. "Amelia," Roman said, turning back to the journalist, his voice dripping with condescension. "My wife is a woman of immense taste. She can tell you the difference between a Monet and a Manet from 20 paces. She can organize a gala for 500 people without breaking a sweat. Her committee decides on the exact shade of beige for the napkins. It's a vital skill." The insult hung in the air, naked and brutal. He wasn't just dismissing her. He was publicly castrating her, reducing her family's legacy and her life's work to floral arrangements. He was telling the entire table, the entire room, that she was nothing, a decoration. "But as for business," Roman continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial growl, "as for power for the real work, she leaves that to me, as she should." He grinned triumphant. "Her only job," he said, raising his glass in a mock toast to her, "is to look beautiful and hold my drink. And she does it perfectly. Don't you, sweetheart?" The silence that followed was heavy and cold. The mayor looked down at his plate. Amelia Vance's pen was frozen. She wasn't smiling. She looked horrified. Hallie Foster sat perfectly still. The blood had drained from her face, leaving her stark white against the gold of her dress. Her grey eyes fixed on Roman. There was no anger in them. There was no sadness. There was only a profound Arctic cold, a finality. She did not cry. She did not yell. She slowly, deliberately placed her napkin on the table. She pushed back her chair, the legs making a faint scraping sound on the marble floor. "If you'll excuse me," she said, her voice a perfectly modulated whisper that nonetheless seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. She stood up. She did not look at Amelia or the mayor or Arthur Kensington. She looked only at her husband. Then she turned and walked away from the table. She didn't flee to the powder room. She walked calmly with perfect posture straight out of the main dining hall and into the lobby, disappearing from view. Roman watched her go, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "Drama," he muttered to the table, forcing a chuckle. "She's probably upset about a broken nail. She'll be back. Now, Amelia, about that conflict of interest nonsense." But no one was listening. They were all staring at the empty chair where Hallie had been. Arthur Kensington slowly turned his gaze from the doorway back to Roman, his expression unreadable. Across the room at his own table, Julian Thorne had watched the entire exchange. He wasn't smiling. He looked at the doorway Hallie had vanished through, then back at the oblivious, pontificating Roman. And then Julian Thorne did smile. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated anticipation. Roman's good mood had been pricked. Hallie's exit was an embarrassment. It was a public display of dissent, and he hated it. He tried to recover, to steer the conversation back to his project, but the energy at the table had shifted. The smooth rolling confidence was gone, replaced by a strained politeness. "She's sensitive," Roman offered to the mayor, who was now meticulously studying his dessert fork. "The Beaumonts are all like that, highly strung, artistic." "Of course," the mayor murmured non-committally. Roman stewed. He mentally calculated the cost of this petulance. Another donation to her little trust. A new bracelet. It was infuriating. He was on the cusp of the greatest triumph of his life, and she had to make a scene about a harmless joke. It was, he thought, profoundly selfish. He checked his watch. 8:50 p.m. "She'll be back," he muttered to himself. "She knows she has to be here for the announcement." The lights dimmed further. The host returned to the podium. "And now," the anchor's voice filled the hall, "it is my distinct honor to introduce a man who has been the steward of our city's great legacy for 3 decades, a titan of industry, a patron of the arts, and a true New Yorker. Please welcome for his final address as chairman, the Honorable Arthur Kensington." The room erupted in a sustained, respectful standing ovation. Arthur, a man of 80 with a ramrod-straight spine and clear blue eyes, walked slowly to the podium. He adjusted the microphone. Roman straightened his Brioni suit jacket. He smoothed his tie. He glanced at the empty seat beside him. Damn her. He forced a magnanimous, confident smile onto his face. This was his moment. Arthur tapped the microphone. The room fell silent. "Thank you." Arthur's voice was frail but carried immense authority. "Thank you all. For 30 years I have had the privilege of sitting at the helm of this great institution. The Metropolitan Legacy Fund is more than a collection of assets. It is the conscience of our city." He paused, looking out over the sea of faces. "When I took this position," he continued, "the city was in a different play. We needed to be bold. We needed to build. We needed to show the world that New York was strong, permanent, and unyielding. We built with steel." Roman beamed. He subtly nudged the mayor. "See, he's talking about me." "But the world changes," Arthur said, his tone shifting. "And the fund must change with it. A city's conscience cannot be static. It must evolve. The challenges of the next 50 years are not the same. Steel and glass can create a skyline, but they cannot create a community. Brute force can build a tower, but it cannot build a future." Roman's smile faltered. A cold knot began to form in his stomach. This was not the speech he had been led to expect. "The board and I," Arthur said, "have spent the last year in a quiet, exhaustive search. We were not looking for another steward. We were looking for a visionary. We were not looking for the loudest voice in the room." His eyes seemed to flick for just a microsecond toward Roman. "We were looking," Arthur said, "for the smartest. We were looking for someone who understands that true, lasting power is not in the things we build for ourselves, but in the foundations we lay for others. We were looking for someone who doesn't just understand legacy, but who is legacy." Roman was no longer smiling. He was confused. This didn't sound like him. He glanced at Julian Thorne's table. Thorne was leaning forward, his expression intense. "Is it Thorne?" The thought sent a jolt of panic through Roman. They wouldn't. They couldn't. "The board's vote was unanimous," Arthur Kensington declared. "We have found a new chair, a new leader who has to us all. For the past decade been operating in plain sight, turning a near-bankrupt family trust into one of the most agile, powerful, and forward-thinking philanthropic engines in this state." Roman's blood ran cold. A family trust, this individual, Arthur said, a rare, warm smile spreading on his face, has been on a dozen unimportant committees. This individual has, without fanfare, saved libraries, funded minority-owned startups, and anonymously endowed 3 separate university chairs in sustainable urban development. This individual has been building a new kind of legacy, one based not on noise, but on results. Roman was drowning. He couldn't breathe. It wasn't possible. It was a joke. A horrible, elaborate joke. "It is my profound honor," Arthur Kensington said, his voice rising, to pass the gavel of the Metropolitan Legacy Fund to its new chairwoman. Chair. Woman. The entire room held its breath. Roman Foster's world, which had been so solid, so permanent, so made of steel, suddenly fractured. "Please join me in welcoming the new chairwoman of the Metropolitan Legacy Fund, Mrs. Halley, Beaumont, Foster." For a full 3 seconds, the only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. 3 seconds of absolute, stunned silence. Roman Foster did not move. He simply stared, his face a mask of complete, uncomprehending shock. He looked at the empty chair beside him, as if expecting Halley to suddenly materialize, laughing at Arthur's strange joke. Then the applause began. It started at Julian Thorne's table. He was on his feet instantly, his applause loud, genuine and thunderous. Amelia Vance, her notepad forgotten, was also standing, her face a picture of stunned, ecstatic revelation. Then the mayor stood. Then the senator. Within 10 seconds, the entire room was on its feet, a deafening wave of applause directed not at the stage, but at the main entrance to the hall. Roman swiveled in his chair. A single, brilliant white spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the grand archway. And there she was. This was not the woman who had left the table. The pale, trembling, humiliated wife in the gold dress was gone. The woman in the spotlight was a queen. She was wearing a gown of deep, luminous emerald green, a custom Oscar de la Renta. It was cut with an architectural precision, severe and breathtaking. It had long sleeves, a high neck, and a bodice that was as structured as armor. Her pale skin and dark hair, now upswept in a severe, elegant chignon, were a stark contrast. The Cartier diamonds were gone. In their place was a single staggering piece, the Beaumont parure, a waterfall of emeralds and diamonds that had not been seen in public for 50 years. She was not wearing a literal crown. She didn't need one. She walked into the room, not with the hesitant, sideways glance of a socialite, but with the measured, unhurried pace of a predator who owns the territory. Her face was calm, her grey eyes sweeping the room, acknowledging the applause with a slight, gracious nod. She did not look at table 1. She did not look at her husband. She walked directly to the stage, shook Arthur Kensington's hand, and accepted the light, symbolic gavel he offered her. She turned to the audience standing at the podium, where Arthur had just spoken. The applause slowly died down as people retook their seats, their necks craning, their minds reeling. Roman was still standing frozen by his table. He looked like a statue, a monument to his own obsolete power. Hallie adjusted the microphone. It made a small thump. She waited. "Thank you, Arthur," she said. Her voice was not the whisper he was used to. It was clear, crisp, and amplified, ringing with a musical authority that filled every corner of the vast hall. "Thanking you to the board, and to all of you." She looked out at the room. "For generations," she began, "the Metropolitan Legacy Fund has been the bedrock of our city. It has, as Arthur so rightly said, been our strength, our steel. But the city is changing. The world is changing. And legacy is not a monument you build and walk away from. It is a garden. It must be tended. It must be fed. And sometimes," her eyes swept the room, "it must be pruned." A nervous titter went through the crowd. "The fund's mission must evolve," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "We can no longer afford to fund monuments to the past. Or," she paused, "monuments to ego." Roman Foster physically recoiled. It was an assassination in public. "Starting tonight," Hallie declared, "the MLF is pivoting. Our primary focus will no longer be large-scale, single-developer projects. Our focus will be on sustainable community, on digital equity, and on green infrastructure. We will be funding the connective tissue of our city. The libraries, the parks, the public data networks, the education programs." She was piece by piece dismantling Roman's entire resurgence project. She was declaring it, and him obsolete in front of the very people he needed to impress. "The old way of doing things is over," she said. "The era of the vanity project is dead." Amelia Vance was writing so fast, her pen was a blur. The mayor was nodding, a sudden political smile on his face, as if this had been his idea all along. "This is not just a promise," Hallie said. "It is a strategy, and it begins tonight. The MLF is proud to announce its first new initiative, the Green Connect Charter, a $500 million grant to revitalize and digitally integrate our community spaces." Roman's hands were clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. He was shaking. 500 million? "And," Hallie said, a small, dangerous smile playing on her lips, "to show that we are serious about a new way of partnership, blending old legacy with new vision, the MLF will not be funding this initiative alone. We are proud to announce our new lead partner in this venture." She looked directly at Julian Thorne. "The Metropolitan Legacy Fund is officially partnering with the Thorne Foundation." The room gasped. Julian Thorne stood up, a broad, brilliant smile on his face. He bowed his head slightly toward Hallie. She nodded back. It was a coronation. A new king and queen anointed. Roman Foster finally collapsed into his chair. He wasn't just beaten. He was annihilated. He was a ghost at his own funeral. Hallie's eyes finally moved to table 1. They swept past the mayor, past the empty plates, and landed on her husband. She looked at the broken, sputtering, white-faced man, who an hour ago had told her to hold his drink. "True legacy," she said, her voice dropping, but her message clear, "is not about the name you build on a tower. It's about the one you build on a foundation. The MLF is now committed to building that foundation for all of New York. Thank you." She stepped back from the podium as a new, more stunned, more frenetic round of applause engulfed her. She had not just walked in wearing the crown. She had melted his down and forged it into her own. The rest of the gala was a blur for Roman. He was a non-entity. People who had been slapping his back an hour before now gave him wide, pitying berths. He was radioactive. He watched as if from a great distance as a crowd formed around Hallie. Julian Thorne was at her side. The mayor was laughing his arm around her shoulder. Amelia Vance was trying to get a quote. Hallie was radiant. She was not the cold queen from the stage. She was now a warm, engaging, and terrifyingly competent leader. She spoke with effortless fluency about bond issues, zoning laws, and fiber-optic partnerships. She was Roman, realized with a sickening lurch, a genius. And she had hidden it. She had hidden it all behind a mask of beige compliance for 10 years. He stumbled out of the gala, not even bothering to retrieve his coat. He stood on the grand steps of the Met, the cool night air hitting his face like a slap. He had no car. The car was her car, arranged by her staff. He waited on the curb, a fallen emperor, until the Foster Holdings driver, who he'd dismissed hours ago, finally found him. The ride back to 740 Park Avenue was silent. He sat in the back of the Maybach, staring at the city lights. His city, a city that had, in the span of 30 minutes, been stolen from him by his own wife. He got to the penthouse first. He was pacing the vast marble living room, his tie ripped off his jacket, thrown on the floor, when he heard the quiet click of the private elevator. She walked in. She was still in the emerald gown, the Beaumont jewels resting on her collarbones. She looked, if possible, even more powerful in the sterile, modern environment of his home. She walked past him, heading toward the bar. "You—" He finally spat his voice, a hoarse croak. "You bitch!" Hallie paused. She turned not with fear, but with a kind of clinical curiosity. She poured herself a small glass of water. "You planned this," he accused, his voice rising to a shout. "You humiliated me. You destroyed my project. You destroyed me. Your project was a bloated, over-leveraged monument to your own ego, Roman," she said, her voice as calm as the water in her glass. "It would have bankrupted the fund and displaced 5,000 people. It was a bad deal. I killed a bad deal. You're a housewife." He roared the word, sounding ridiculous even to his own ears. "You plan parties. You fat. Flowers, the napkins." Hallie took a small sip of water. "Yes, the napkins. While I was deciding on the exact shade of beige, I was also listening. I was listening to the mayor complain about his budget shortfalls. I was listening to the hedge fund managers complain about your leverage. I was listening to the community leaders in the Bronx who you never even met. You thought I was wallpaper Roman, and you were too arrogant to ever look closely at the pattern. The Beaumont Trust. It's nothing," he yelled. "It's pocket money." "It was," she corrected. "When you let me have it, it was worth about $4 million. This morning, the Beaumont Trust's liquid assets are valued at just over $1.2 billion. Roman stopped. He couldn't process the number. $1.2 billion. How? You build with steel. I build with information. While you were taking hostile takeovers, I was making quiet, strategic seed investments. You like buying companies. I like funding founders. You'd be amazed what a $100,000 investment in a biotech firm 10 years ago is worth today. Or a small data processing company. One that incidentally Julian Thorne's fund later acquired. He and I have been moving in the same circles for years, Roman. You just never thought to ask who was in the room with me." She was laying it all bare. The flower committees were board meetings. The poetry readings were investment pitches. The ladies' lunches were strategy sessions with the most powerful women in the city. "You used me," he whispered, the rage turning to a cold, sick dread. "You used me." She countered, her voice hardening for the first time. "You married me for my name. You used me as a prop. You silenced me, dismissed me, and belittled me. You thought I was an asset, and you were right. I was, just not your asset." The dread in his stomach was now pure, unadulterated terror. He was finally seeing the chessboard. The MLF chair," he stammered. "Kensington. He wouldn't just—" "Arthur Kensington was my father's godfather," Hallie said flatly. "He has been my mentor since I was 20. He asked me to take over the fund 3 years ago. I told him I wasn't ready. I told him I had one last piece of business to attend to." "What business?" Roman whispered. Hallie walked over to her antique desk in the corner. She unlocked a drawer and pulled out a thick, leather-bound portfolio. She slid it across the marble coffee table to him. "Foster Holdings," she said. He opened it. His eyes scanned the pages, his face growing paler with every line. It was a breakdown of his company, his debt, his leveraged assets, and at the bottom a list of his primary, secondary, and tertiary creditors. He didn't understand. "What is this? Do you remember the Phoenix Capital Group?" she asked. "The anonymous Asian fund that saved your 42nd Street deal 5 years ago. The one that bought up all your toxic debt and restructured it." He nodded, confused. "They saved me." "That was me," Hallie said. Roman's world tilted on its axis. "It was the Beaumont Trust's first major acquisition," she explained. "You were over-leveraged. You were about to lose everything. I couldn't have that. I needed you to stay on top. I needed you to keep building, to keep borrowing, to keep expanding, to keep digging your own grave. I've been your primary creditor for 5 years, Roman." He looked at her, his mouth open, no sound coming out. He was a fly in a web he had never seen. "You don't just own me," he whispered. "I own this apartment," she said. "I own the car you ride in. I own the Foster Resurgence Project, which I am officially dissolving tomorrow morning at the first MLF board meeting. I own you." She let that hang in the air, the final, brutal, undeniable truth. He had mocked her. He had called her a nobody. And for 5 years she had been his banker, his savior, and his executioner all at once. Roman Foster. The man of granite and ambition finally broke. He didn't just sit. He collapsed onto the cream-colored $1,000 sofa. His body, moments before vibrating with rage, was now utterly slack. He sank his head into his hands, his elbows on his knees. The Brioni suit. His armor felt cheap and heavy like a costume. He was ruined. It wasn't just the money. It wasn't just the chairmanship of the MLF. It was the sheer, suffocating totality of his defeat. It was the realization that his entire life, his entire empire, had been a stage play, directed by the one person he hadn't even considered an actor. He had been playing checkers against a grandmaster, and she had been playing for a decade. The penthouse, his penthouse, was silent. The only sound was the distant, indifferent hum of the city he had meant to conquer. "Why?" he finally asked. His voice was not a roar. It was a dry, hollow croak that was swallowed by the cavernous room. "Why? This all of it. 10 years, Hallie. Why not just leave me?" Hallie was standing by the window, her back to him, looking out over the glittering expanse of Central Park. The emerald of her dress seemed to drink in the city lights. "Leave you, Roman," she said, her voice calm and reflective. "That would have been incomplete. It would have been an emotional act. This was not about emotion. This was about restoration." She turned. Her face was not filled with hatred or even triumph. It was the dispassionate, objective face of a CEO who has just successfully completed a hostile takeover. "You were destroying my family's name," she stated simply. "You didn't just marry me, you consumed my legacy. You took the Beaumont name, a name that meant something in this city, and you turned it into a joke, a society page footnote, the silent, pretty, stupid wife of Roman Foster." She began to walk slowly toward him, her heels clicking with the finality of a gavel on the marble floor. "My grandfather, Robert Beaumont, endowed the public university's engineering school. My mother, Catherine Beaumont, funded the first free women's clinic in this city. They built foundations. They built futures." She stopped, standing over him. "And you," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper of profound contempt. "You had their descendant, me, reduced to a photograph in Vogue, praised for my impeccable taste in napkins." The word hung in the air, vibrating with a decade of suppressed fury. "I didn't do this for revenge, Roman. Revenge is a messy, passionate thing. This," she said, gesturing to the room. "The city to him, this was a correction. I was restoring the Beaumont legacy. And to do that, I had to completely and surgically dismantle the Foster one." He looked up from his hands, his face ashen. The full, horrifying scope of his arrogance was finally crashing down on him. "All those years," he whispered. "All the dinners, the parties. You were listening. You weren't just smiling. You were so desperate to prove you were the smartest man in the room, you never once stopped to wonder who else was in it," she said. "Your dismissal of me was the most valuable asset I ever had. It was the perfect cover." Tonight, he stammered, the memory of his own voice, his own public mockery hitting him like a physical blow. "At the table, when I said those things, you already knew. You let me. You sat there and you let me destroy myself. I let you be you, Roman. That was all that was required." He was breathing hard now, the last vestiges of his denial crumbling. "So what now?" he asked, his voice the plea of a broken man. "What happens? You liquidate me. You throw me out onto the street. Don't be dramatic," she said, her voice devoid of pity. "This isn't a soap opera. This is a transaction." She walked to the massive glass coffee table. From her small emerald clutch, she produced a key and unlocked a drawer in the antique Beaumont desk in the corner, her desk which he'd always considered a frivolous, sentimental piece. She pulled out 2 leather-bound portfolios. "As of 9:00 a.m. tomorrow," she said, placing the first one in front of him. "Foster Holdings and all its subsidiaries will be officially absorbed by a new urban development wing of the Beaumont Trust, a wing that I will be chairing in conjunction with my duties at the MLF." He stared at the cover, his own logo, but he didn't open it. He couldn't. "The Foster name will cease to exist in the market," she continued, as if reading a financial report. "The Resurgence Project is dead, as I said. Its assets, its debts, will be reallocated. Your services will no longer be required." That phrase, the cold corporate dismissal, hit him harder than any shout. He had been fired from his own life. "But he stammered, gesturing uselessly between them. "I'm your husband." "No, Roman," she said, placing the second, thinner, blue-backed document on top of the first. "You're not. That was the last piece of business." "Divorce papers." He stared at them. Foster v. Foster. It was the final clean surgical cut. "My lawyer, Mr. Harrison, is waiting in the lobby," she said. "He will be up in 5 minutes to collect your signature. I've already signed." Roman let out a harsh, strangled laugh. "Contest," he croaked. "You expect me to contest on what grounds, with what money?" "Exactly," she said. "You are in no position to. The terms are clean. I am not a cruel woman, Roman, just a thorough one. You will be left with a small stipend-based trust. It's already been funded." She paused. "Enough to maintain your club membership and live comfortably. But you will never build or borrow or matter in this city again. You will be, in effect, a hobbyist." The callback to his own insult was so precise, so devastating it took his breath away. He looked around the vast empty penthouse, the marble, the glass, the art he'd bought. My home. It was never your home, Roman. It was my asset," she corrected him. "The lease has been held by the Beaumont Trust for 5 years, ever since I acquired your debt. You've been my tenant." She gestured to the grand entryway. By the door, a single modest black suitcase stood alone. "Your personal effects have been packed. You'll be staying at the club. Temporarily, of course. Where you go from there is your concern." An entire life, an empire reduced to a piece of carry-on luggage. He picked up the heavy, expensive pen from the table. His hand was shaking, but he opened the file. He found the signature line. The sound of the nib scratching on the thick linen paper was deafening. The death of his world, signed in triplicate. He slid the document back across the table. "You thought of everything," he murmured. It was not a question. "Yes," she said. "I did." She turned and walked toward the private elevator. She had taken off the heavy Beaumont necklace, and she was rubbing the skin on her collarbone, a small, human, tired gesture. The armor was coming off. The job was done. She pressed the call button. The quiet ding of the arriving car echoed in the hall. "Hallie," he said, his voice raw. She paused her hand on the opening elevator door, but she did not turn around. That joke I made tonight." He stammered, the shame finally fully burning in his throat. "At the table. About you holding my drink." "I remember," she said, her voice quiet. "It was vile. He didn't know what he was trying to say. To apologize, to explain. It was all pointless. She cut him off, her voice soft but utterly final. "It was the truth, Roman." He looked up confused. "It was the only true thing you said all night. You just misidentified the roles." She stepped into the mirrored elevator and turned to face him for the last time. The woman he never saw in the emerald gown, her grey eyes as clear and cold as winter. "You see," she said, as the heavy bronze doors began to slide shut, "you were never the king. You were just the man holding my drink, while I bought the bar." The doors closed with a soft final hiss, sealing him in. He was left alone in the vast empty penthouse, with nothing but a single suitcase and the echoing silence of his own magnificent, catastrophic failure. In the end, Roman Foster signed the papers. He vanished from the world of power, a ghost haunting the clubs he used to own. Amelia Vance's story on the Gala coup became the most read article in Time's history, a modern legend of power arrogance and the quiet, unseen genius of Hallie Beaumont Foster. Hallie, of course, thrived as chairwoman of the MLF and head of the Beaumont Trust. She and Julian Thorne fundamentally remade the city, focusing on the very communities Roman had dismissed. She never remarried. She didn't need to. She was too busy building her own legacy, one of steel, yes, but of a stronger steel, the kind forged in silence, patience, and absolute, unshakable purpose. This story is a powerful reminder that the world often mistakes quietness for weakness. It shows us that true power doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to mock. It just needs to wait for the perfect moment to act. The crown isn't always given. Sometimes it has to be taken. What did you think of Hallie's decade-long plan? Was it brilliant, or was it cold-blooded? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this story of justice and a fall from grace, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel. We have so many more real-life dramas and incredible stories to share with you. Don't miss a single one.